Hi everyone, this is Professor Hall, and I decided to record a lecture for you about Pygmalion because I think that if you go into the play without understanding anything about it, it can be quite confusing. So I've entitled this Pygmalion, a play that still matters. Pygmalion was written in the early 1900s, and it is it's a play that is really important to know a bit about the setting and why some of the characters make the choices that they're making. So the first thing I want to say is hopefully you've already watched and read. Hopefully you read. Hopefully you've already read and then watched the two versions of Sure Thing, the play by David Ives. The play Sure Thing is an interesting examination of how people fall in love, the way that timing works, and really, though, the way that we judge each other. So I had you watch those adaptations and read that very short play, kind of to get you thinking about the themes that are in this play, because it's a little bit more of a challenging text. So the first thing, what we say and how we say it. I have three things here that are essentially the same information, but said in three very different ways. So, women's centers on American college campuses are diverse in their missions and founding precepts, but often have the primary focus of empowering women to study in a competitive educational environment. This is what we call a more academic tone, right? You probably heard something about this, hopefully, in English 123. Phrases like founding precepts that we have here, primary focus, the word primary, the word empowering, it's a little bit elevated, right? It tells you that we're going to talk in a theoretical way about the purpose of American college, women's centers and college campuses, why they were founded, what they focus on, that kind of thing, right? So here's a statement that might be said by somebody on a college campus, maybe while they're giving a tour. So there's a women's center on that campus. They have programs and presentations for women in business and stuff, right? A lot more informal, particularly the last part here. They have some presentations and stuff like that, right? I wrote this in a very ridiculous way, kind of for a reason. Hey, anybody know what a women's center is? Is that where all the chicks be at? Hashtag party at the women's center tonight. So my point here is, this is the kind of thing down here that we might see like in very informal language online or in message boards or in text messages, right? And a lot of people speak this way, having a phrase like is that where they all be at, right? We understand the way we talk that it basically means, hey, does anyone know what a women's center is? Is that where all the women are tonight? That's a more formal way of saying it. So the thing that is in the play, we have a flower girl, Eliza. I'll talk about her more in a little bit and what a flower girl is. And the idea is that really in the beginning of the play especially, she is talking like this third person here, and it can be kind of difficult to read, but we'll talk about that more in a minute. So what we say and how we say it, again, kind of like the play Sure Thing, we judge people sometimes on what they say. Do they say potatoes versus taters? Do they say he and I are going to a party tonight versus me and him is going to a party tonight, right? I shall not drink that versus I ain't drinking that. My child's mother versus my baby mama. Converse versus conversate, which is not really a word. Want to versus wanna. Cause instead of because. So when we put it together, I want to converse with my child's mother because I will not be having potatoes for dinner. Versus, I want to conversate with my baby mama because I ain't having taters for dinner. I have this little picture of Larry the Cable Guy. Taters, I think he would probably say. And that's the kind of thing. Larry the Cable Guy in real life is from Ohio and speaks with about the type of accent that I have, being from Buffalo and kind of close to the Pennsylvania and Ohio border. Similarly, in New York, we have that type of an accent. He puts on this accent of saying things like, yeah, me and my baby mama, we got to get down there and we're going to grab some taters and we're going to conversate about things, right? He puts that on and makes himself seem like a redneck. And what is a redneck another word for? Someone who is not very educated, right? So a lot of times we judge people by this, by the way that they speak, by the way that they talk. And that is one of the major themes in this play. And how else can we judge people? Well, we judge them by sometimes what gender they are, what race or ethnicity, what's their education, what's their lifestyle, how do they appear, what are their beliefs or their education. There are people that you can talk to who will say, here it is, number 7, your choice of a pet. Oh, he's a cat person, so I won't date him. I'm really more of a dog person. Right? That's the way that people are judged. She always comes late. That's the way people are judged. How you ask a question, your favorite color. I always think that's kind of a ridiculous one. If you're above 6 and you have a favorite color, it's kind of strange. But anyway, your handwriting. So these are the kind of things that we judge people and say they're not like us, or we don't identify with them. They can't understand what we can understand. And that is, again, a little bit about what this play is about. It's about gender equality. It's about economic equality. And what are those things that separate us? How we judge people and kind of try to keep them in a place, keep them in a certain position, so that they're unable to move up in the world or be successful because of some of these things, because of who they are. So if you, hopefully already you have watched the video about Pygmalion and the literary allusion that is there. A literary allusion is when we make reference to something, usually something famous, something well known outside of the text. So you might have here notice that the name is kind of strange for this play. It's called Pygmalion. There's nobody named Pygmalion in the play, and it's not about Pygmalion in any way, shape, or form. So the video will explain this a little bit better and kind of in a more fun way. But here is this is Pygmalion right here, this gentleman, and this is Galatea, and essentially Pygmalion was a sculptor and sculpted Galatea, this beautiful statue, and fell in love with her because he sculpted her. So the play is named after that myth, and we'll talk a little bit more in a minute. We'll talk a little bit more about why. Major adaptations of this play. So we have in the play, I should have done this first. What's the play about? Then we'll go back to adaptations in a minute. Eliza, pictured here in the front, in her tattery clothes. In the beginning of the play, we see Eliza, a poor flower girl, selling flowers on the street. She speaks with a very thick accent, and again, a lot of her word choices are extremely informal. So it's kind of like if I said, I ain't going to tell you no more about this dumb play. Like that. She meets Henry Higgins. He is a professor of linguistics. Linguistics is the study of language. So she meets him. He convinces her, or she convinces him rather, to teach her, because she wants to speak properly. She's never been really educated. She wants Professor Higgins to educate her so that she can improve her life. And in that sense, it's kind of like the myth of Galatea and Pygmalion. he is sculpting her to the image of a proper British lady. So some of the adaptations of this, we have different guys kind of sculpting women to be the image that they want them to be. And usually these are love stories. So the 1980s movies, Mannequin and Weird Science. Mannequin, he builds a mannequin and then she comes to life and they fall in love. Oh man, I love the 80s so much, the wacky movies. Weird Science, these two nerds here build a woman on their computer, a perfect model of a woman, and then I kid you not, they put underwear on their heads and then lightning strikes and then she comes to life. So again, right, the idea that you're taking something, creating it, falling in love with it. The interesting thing is that in our play, there is really a question as to whether or not Professor Higgins has fallen in love with Eliza, and that's kind of the question that I'd like you to answer in your discussion board post. Other things, if you've seen Lars and the Real Girl, it's a man who builds a real doll and then sort of he has kind of a mental illness and believes that she's real and that she loves him. Selfie is an adaptation of this that was on TV for like half a season and got canceled. But that half a season was only 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, so I left the picture in. And then She's All That. Any makeover movie where the guy's like, see that chick over there? I can make her into something special. So, who wrote our original play? Going back to the original. George Bernard Shaw was born in Dublin. He moved in London to become a playwright. He struggled before publishing, but won the Nobel Prize. So Pygmalion was written in 1912. He also wrote a screenplay adaptation, which was up for the Academy Award in 1938. Now that screenplay adaptation, I have linked for you on our website. It's on YouTube. You can go and watch it. It's not exactly the same as the play. I also would say if you've seen the movie My Fair Lady, I think that is a more interesting adaptation. The addition of the music kind of changes a lot of George Bernard Shaw's original intent. But that's another discussion for another day. So most of Shaw's work is quite didactic. That's a word down here that means it's meant for instruction. He said that this play is a pot boiler. A pot boiler back in the day, to be more informal. Back in the day, a pot boiler was really something that would be fun, bring in a lot of money. Today we call them popcorn movies, right? As opposed to like an independent film or an Academy Award nominee. It's a popcorn movie. He wrote it to be like Avengers or Deadpool 2, something like that, right? The thing is, I would say that there are still parts of this play that are quite didactic. They're meant to teach you something more than some of the lighter, fluffier things that other playwrights were doing. He has a message here that he's trying to convey to the audience. So, this you don't really need to know, but I think it's interesting. So, Shaw wrote the play for this woman, Mrs. Patrick Campbell. She is an actress, and he called her Stella, which means stars, right? So, they have an affair. They're going to run away to a seaside resort. They're both married. He runs away and goes to the seaside resort and is waiting for her. And while he's waiting, he receives a note that is from her that says that she's gone off with a younger man. And so Shaw returns back to his wife, who apparently was fine or didn't know anything about it and just took him back. So Stella writes, I ought to think like a man would in this situation, shouldn't I? Which is interesting to me because it was really like around 1910. You don't really have people getting divorced as much back then. But also the idea that a woman would just say, I can take whatever lover I want and I'm going to think more like a man. I'm not going to give my heart away really like a woman. And here's what he replied. Infamous, vile, heartless, frivolous, wicked woman, liar, lying lips, lying eyes, lying hands, promise breaker, cheat, confidence trickster, you are an owl, sickened by my 2 days of sunshine. Well, tell us how you really feel, George Bernard Shaw. The thing is that you're married and you're calling her a promise breaker and a cheat. It's just so ironic and hilarious to me. So anyway, after this, he gets over his rage a little bit, and he lets her come back to star in the play because he wrote it for her to begin with. So he rages at her throughout rehearsals. He leaves in the middle of opening night. Now, when you read the play, I'm going to do a spoiler alert. When you read the play, the end of the play ends kind of on a question. Professor Higgins and Eliza have gotten into a fight, and she storms out, and he looks over to his mother, who's been watching this, and basically says, well, she'll be back in a bit. And people hated the end of this play and thought that they should have it changed. So on opening night, when he left, the director of the play, seeing that Shaw was gone, he actually changed the ending. So Eliza storms off, slams the door. Then 3 seconds later, she comes back in, and she and Henry Higgins kiss, and then the curtain drops. So it's interesting that really George Bernard Shaw did not intend for them to be in love in this play, Henry Higgins and Eliza. However, many people have interpreted the play as them being in love. And really and truly, the author's intent here doesn't really matter as much as how we interpret the play. And I'm sure, as you can see from Sure Thing, the way that actors choose to read their lines really makes a difference. So whoever is in the play, sometimes they make that interpretation and they end it with them being in love, and other times they don't. So it's up to you kind of to decide. Historical background. Women were flower girls, which we don't really have as much now. Back in London in those days, the late 1800s and the early 1900s, children would not always go to school, or they would go to school for a shorter period of time. Many had to work. Here in the United States, you would have boys going to school for a little bit of time and then leaving sometimes to go help on the farm. So sometimes boys would be in school like in the winter and spring, but not in the fall when harvest season was going on. And sometimes they wouldn't have school in the winter, depending on where they were and what the weather was like. So similarly, girls sometimes had to help out, and that was in rural areas. And in more urban areas, you have children who need to go to work. This is before child labor laws, so kids would go and they would work in sweatshops, they would work in, they would be sewing, they would be in factories, they would be in the coal mines. And in London, which was an urban area even then, children would be selling flowers in the streets. Girls, as it says here, from about ages 6 to 20, boys about under the age of 10, before they would go and you know, how you do at 11 when you go and get your real man's job, and then you're a factory worker for 40 years and then you drop. So the thing is that Eliza in the play is right on the cusp of this. She is about 20, maybe 21, 22. So she's in her early 20s. And sometimes girls ages 16 to 20 would be selling flowers to help support their families or themselves. Other times, women would pretend to be selling flowers, but they would actually be prostituting themselves. So you would have flower carts would bring the flowers. Girls would go and get them, and they would sell them for a little bit of a markup. So, you know, getting paying maybe a halfpenny, a half a penny, and maybe getting a penny for them, let's say, or a nickel or whatever the equivalent in British money might be. And this is important to understanding the first scene, because Eliza is really comes into question as to her character. And she is trying to protest that. She says over and over and over, we talked about motifs, which are repeating elements. And she says over and over, I'm a good girl, I am. I'm a good girl. I'm not out here prostituting myself. I'm just trying to do the right thing and make money for myself and support myself. Another piece of historical background, Shaw detested the idle rich. So what you have in England at this time are people who live on so much money a year and they don't really do anything. They inherit wealth and then they live on the interest. So they go and they have an education, but their education is not really preparing them for anything. So they have a lot of high ideas, but not necessarily, they're not doing any really hard work. In the meantime, in this budding industrial age, you have the poor people really working like crazy. And the difficulty here, like the yellow wallpaper, we don't have much of a middle class. So Shaw felt the British education system was pointless. He also did not like the disparities between men and women. So a lot of his work is features strong female characters. Later in his life, he becomes a communist. He, in the way that he thought communism could bring an ideal utopian society. Again, you have to kind of remember that this is early days of communism when it's a lot of theory. It's just sort of starting in Russia, and you don't have the bloody history of it that we have now with China or with Stalin, people like that. So in his work, you can kind of see this. Professor Higgins is wealthy, but he is working, and he is interested in doing work. Whereas you also have, sorry, apparently my computer is trying to update. You also have Freddie, who is idle rich, and so is his sister. They're wealthy, they're loafers, they don't really do anything. And then you have Eliza's father. Now it's interesting because Eliza's father is also poor, like Eliza, but he's a loafer. He doesn't really do anything. He'll take an odd job, maybe here or there, make a little bit of money. He drinks it away. And he is really looked down on with disdain, when really he has the same values as Freddie and Freddie's mother. But he doesn't have the money to go along with it. So again, asking how we judge people. Major themes in this play. This is from a different adaptation. Here we see Eliza after her transformation and Professor Higgins. If I can zoom in here, a different adaptation. You can see he's kind of looking at her, as I would put it, saucily. He's looking at her with a little bit of romantic interest, right? Let me get that back. Here we go. Sorry. So, the first thing is that it is a strange twist on a Cinderella story. Usually, Cinderella stories, you have a poor girl who meets a prince and they fall in love, right? This is a poor girl who is transformed, but she doesn't necessarily fall in love with the prince, and she has to put in a lot of hard work to become transformed. She's not just, mice don't sing and just make her a dress. The vulnerable position of poor, particularly impoverished women. They are vulnerable. There are a lot of questions here that Eliza asks and that Professor Higgins' mother asks. What's going to become of her? What will she do now that she's changed? She doesn't have many options. Marry, go back to what you were doing, possibly a third avenue if they can find that. If they can kind of get a very small way into the middle class, the growing middle class, possibly. The lazy, idle rich, in contrast with the working poor. The ability of women to act as strong as their male counterparts, knowledge and real education as a way of changing a person's life. This is a major theme. Her life is changed because she is educated properly. And if we can get proper education, That is the way out. And honestly, to me, this is one of the reasons this play matters. Well, I can say that as a teacher, right? But I have seen people who, my dad is a really good example. My father's father had a restaurant that failed. His family had nothing, basically, by the time he was ready to go to college. He's from Rotterdam. And he worked his way through college, and it was college or the army. Those were his choices. And he really built himself up into being this very well-educated man. He also became a teacher, and changed his circumstances and was able to help his parents later in life, that kind of thing. And that's one of the themes to this play. If you have a real education, it can change your life. It really can. The role of language is also a major theme here, defining not only social class, but also an individual's sense of identity and worth. How do we talk? And what does that say about us? And how do we talk about ourselves to portray ourselves to other people? And yeah, how does that play into our identity? Her identity changes. You looked at characterization before. You can see from here and from the previous pictures, she goes from rags to riches almost because of her knowledge, because of her education, and the way that she speaks to people and about herself. She's a dynamic character. Big change from beginning to end. So, I'm going to go here first. Sorry. Reading the dialect. One of the things about this play is that you really cannot understand what the hell she is saying. And honestly, you're not supposed to. So in the first act, and really part of the second act as well, you can't understand what she's saying. So here's an excerpt, and I will read it the way that she says it. Let's see if we can. There we go. Now then, Freddie, look where you're going, dear. So she is saying, now then, Freddie, look where you're going, dear. You notice that he has written it phonetically. Phonetically means that it's written the way it sounds. Freddie says, sorry. He rushes off. The flower girl, there's manners for you. Two old branches of violets trod in the mud. So, there's manners for you. 2 whole branches of violets trod in the mud. This is what Professor Higgins is writing in to take down her language. This is called diacritics. Voiceless or slack voice. Does she have a breathy voice? Is there a nasal release? Is she strident? Is she creaky? Does she her T's, or does she her T's when she says them? That's basically what he's doing. So here the woman said, oh, that's my son. How did you know his name? And she says, oh, he's your son, is he? Well, if he done by your duty by him as a mother should, he'd know better than to spoil a poor girl's flowers, then ran away. So, oh, is your son, is he? Well, if you'd had done it your duty by him as a mother should, he'd know better than to spoil a poor girl's flowers, then run away. So again, you can even see the author here has apologized. Here with apologies, this desperate attempt to represent her dialect without a phonetic alphabet must be abandoned as unintelligible outside London. And that is really the key. You can read through it. You can watch the video to kind of understand how she's talking a little bit better. But for the most part, you're not supposed to be able to understand what she says. And I think then later on it becomes easier. A lot of people give up in Act 1 because they don't know what she's saying. If you can't understand it, it's okay. Neither can anyone else around her. And here we go. Last to consider, again, from a third adaptation of this play, she's taken Professor Higgins' book where he's been writing down everything she says. Number one, think about how the characters in the play relate to your own experiences. Have you been judged on how you write or how you talk or how you speak? What is your voice? How does your voice say something about who you are? And how do people judge you about that sometimes? And the judgments can be positive or negative, right? Number two, what would the play maybe look like when it's performed? Really look at the descriptions of the costumes and the sets. Those things, I'll click back here just for a second. Those things in the parentheses here, in the brackets rather, those are important. Don't just skip over them. They're telling you about what the people are doing, what they're wearing, that kind of thing. What do you think the play would look like if it were in modern times? And do you think Henry and Eliza are in love? Again, Shaw disagreed with this idea, but most people at the time thought they were in love and changed the ending of the play. So which one do you think it is? That's the question that you'll be answering in your homework. I look forward to looking at the discussion board and seeing what you have to say about the play Pygmalion. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.